So thank you all for being here today. And thank you for joining us at a time that is not our usual. My name is Julie Watkins, and I'll be hosting today's travelogue brought to you by the Geographic Society of Chicago. Since 1898, the Geographic Society of Chicago has educated the public about geography and its important uses. Today's GSC trains students in the latest geospatial technology. Through services such as our community mapping projects, we offer unique educational experiences that harness the power of maps and the integrative tools of GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, to solve environmental and community issues. Together, our board and membership provide educational opportunities for students and educators, assist in building geographic materials collections in educational and cultural institutions, promote new and emerging technologies and problem solving, and much more. With us to present today is Eugene Flynn. Eugene Flynn and his wife Mary have been to Europe 18 times in the last 15 years before the great COVID-19 lockdown. He loves to share their adventures with audiences at libraries and senior centers. The Illinois Geographer recently published an article on Eugene and his travels to Lyon, France. Before we begin, let me note that we will have a question and answer section following Eugene's presentation. So if you look at your screen, you'll see the Q&A button at the bottom. And if there's any question that you have for Eugene, go ahead and type it in that window. Following the presentation, we'll answer as many questions as time allows for. And with that, I will pass things over to Eugene. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Julie. Today, we're going to be talking about a trip that Mary and I took with some friends back in 2015. And the main part of what we'll be talking about today is from the Athens to Istanbul. And the background for the trip, Mary and I were at a fundraiser for the singing group that Mary's part of, the Chicago Master Singers. And one of the prizes from the auction was, the blind auction was a 7 days in Tuscany, a house in Tuscany. So we were there with two friends of ours, two couples. So we put our little tickets into the basket and we said, if any one of us wins, we'll all go together. So we did win the prize, which fortunately, and here's a picture with Mary is on the far right, and Barb and Jack Stretch are on the left, and Julie and Bruce Glesney are there in the middle. So here we are. I think we were in Florence at this particular picture. I'm just going to talk very, very briefly about the portion of the trip in Italy. But here is a view from the balcony of the house that we won in the auction. And it was in the small Italian village, Pandesco in Tuscany, about 30 miles south of Florence. And the village is just a village of about 2,000 people. And we had a wonderful time there. We had a car, so we were able to go to other cities and visit other parts of Tuscany and Umbria. Here is what the trip looked like, the overall trip. So we flew to Venice and spent 2 nights in Venice. And then we went on to the rental house in Tuscany that we had won. And then two couples went on to Rome, and one couple went over to Lisbon for a cruise out on the Atlantic. But on the train going from Florence to Rome, we actually left Mary's phone on the train. And by the time I went back to the train to find it, it was gone. The train had been gone. So the phone was lost. So as we went back to our hotel and we were checking our emails, and lo and behold, we found out that the flight from Rome to Athens had been canceled, and they had put us onto a flight 3 days later, and we would have missed our ship that was taking us through the Greek Isles. But so in one sense, we were fortunate that we lost the phone, and it forced us to reconnect with the airlines in Italy, which we did. And then they put us on a flight that would get us to Athens in time. So we then flew to Athens, spent 2 nights in Athens, and then boarded a cruise ship for 7 days on the Greek Isles and spent 2 final days in Istanbul before we came back. So we did quite a bit. This is just over 2 weeks. Now, this is just it's not a very perfect map, but this is showing Athens there in the middle. And then this is showing the Greek Isles. And down below, there's in white, you see the Crete that is next to the Sea of Crete. And then Turkey is off to the right. And all of these places are pretty close together. You know, these are not huge distances between Athens and the western side of Turkey. So you know, a lot of history has happened here, but these regions are actually pretty close together. So I wanted to cover a little bit about modern Greek history, because I know a fair amount, you know, from high school and college about ancient Greece and the Spartans and Plato and you know, the great dialogues and the democracy of Athens. And I even studied the Greek language in college, but that was ancient Greek. It wasn't modern Greek language. And I knew relatively little about modern Greek history. So here is a little thumbnail sketch. So from the fall of Constantinople in 1453 up until 1820s, Greece was ruled by the Islamic Turks out of Istanbul. So it was part of the Ottoman Empire. And in 1821, the Greeks declared their independence. They fought a war for independence. 1827, and they were doing fairly well part of the time, but then part of the time it looked like the Turks in the would put down the rebellion, what they viewed as a rebellion. However, in 1827, the Russian, British, and French Navy intervened to crush the Ottoman Navy. And so that paved the way for the success of the Greek rebellion. 1833, Athens was selected as the capital of Greece, of the new unified Greek country, even though it was a small village at the time. So the glory of Athens from ancient times had really pretty much disappeared, and much of it had to be excavated. 1919, 1922, there was a Greek-Turkish war with lots of massacres on both sides, atrocities, very bitter battles. There were many Greeks that lived on the mainland, lived in what's now the territory of Turkey, and they were protected by the Greek army and navy, but that all fell apart. So in the 1920s, many Greeks immigrated to the US, Canada, and Australia. Australia was a very popular place, and it was very welcoming of Greeks that wanted to move there. World War II, Greeks sided with the Allies, with the English, and the British army tried to hold off the German army, but was unsuccessful. So it was occupied by the German army. 1944 to 49, after the Germans were defeated, there was a civil war, a very bitter civil war in Greece with the Western and Marxist factions. But again, Britain and the US intervened. There's a pattern here that I kind of highlighted in red, that the European powers and then the US really went to the aid of Greece many times, and it was not necessarily, it was in the case of Britain, Greece occupied a very important spot strategically in the Mediterranean, which the British considered their lake of ownership, but there was a real affinity among Britons to support Greece throughout the ages. More recent history, in the 50s and 60s, there was an economic recovery with the Marshall Plan, sending money to help rebuild Greek infrastructure and the economy and factories. In 1981, they joined the European Union. In 2002, they adopted the euro, and the economy boomed with the being part of the European Union. In 2004, they sponsored the Summer Olympics at Athens with a new airport. and a brand new expanded subway system. So what could go wrong? Well, what really went wrong shortly after the Olympics, it was clear that the Greek economy was very lopsided, that they were spending much more than the economy could generate in taxes. Uh, and, and the Greek government bonds, even though they were probably inherently very risky, they were treated as safe as the German bonds. And so there was a, there was a crisis in the making. And the 2008 to 2014, there were ongoing financial crises, and low productivity, eroding competitiveness, and rampant tax evasion. Not paying taxes is kind of a national sport within Greece. But in May of 2015, when we were there, it was a financial crisis had come to a head, and it was the ATM machines were not functioning. They were giving a limited amount of money. There was a risk of Greece being expelled from using the euro, that they'd have to go back to some Greek denomination. The whole country could have been in bankruptcy. So it was a very tense situation economically, but there was a bailout 2 months later. So by July, 2 months after we were there was the third bailout, basically by Germany and France. So that's just a little what was historically taking place. So here is the pictures of the modern airport and the new subway systems. The Athens population, almost 4 million people in the metro area, and about 11 million in all of Greece. We love to dine outside, and there was wonderful dining. In Greece is such a pleasant, here, this was in May, so you would think it was for evening dining. It was very, very comfortable. Probably all year round, there would be outdoor dining, at least the vast majority of the year, with wonderful food and great hospitality. The next day, we walked through the ancient agora, which was the social and commercial center of Athens. And this, Socrates and Plato, they spent their time here with, having their students and philosophy and discussions. This area was basically all underground from the 2,000 years of non-involvement. The population of Athens had turned very small. So this area that we see here was all underground and was excavated beginning in the 1930s. What you see in the distance is the Parthenon. So we'll see that shortly. Here's an outdoor performance as we were walking towards the Parthenon. And here they hold summer concerts, very, very popular area. And you see in the background part of Metro Athens in the distance. We were climbing up these very uneven stairs. At the bottom there, the stairs look very even, but parts of the climb is very uneven. And there really isn't a real elevator. There is a little conveyor system that will carry one person at a time up to the top, where but you need a note from your doctor that you can't make the climb in order to use that. It's like one person at a time. It's like a little, think of it as almost a chairlift, a single person chairlift that you might see at a ski resort. And here we are at the top of the Parthenon. And so this building had been really used for ceremonial purposes in antiquity. It wasn't used every day. It was a temple, but it certainly has an impressive presence in the whole city. And if you look at the top, first of all, you see damage, a lot of damage to the building, because in the Greco-Turkish wars in the 1820s, there was ammunition stored here, and there had been explosions. So there had been significant damage that took place during that war. And if you notice at the top, near the very top of the building. There are some vertical, like 3 vertical carvings in the side of the building. These contained what you'll see in a few minutes, this amazing carvings in stone depicting heroic scenes from antiquity. So we'll see those later because they're in a museum. Actually, they're in several museums. So we did spend time at the top. It was a beautifully warm day. After we left the Acropolis, we went down to the modern Acropolis Museum. And you can see the Acropolis off in the distance up on that huge hill. So in a hill with very steep walls separating the Acropolis is built on the top. So just getting all those stones up to the top of that hill would have been an amazing feat. So this museum has wonderful displays talking about the Acropolis and ancient Athens, and showing the artwork and how it was prepared. These are the artwork that was positioned at the top there, but these are actually lifelike recreations of the frieze, what they call the frieze that wound around all the Acropolis. Because back in 1805, Lord Elgin of England went to the Turkish government and said, "Can I take these off of the Parthenon and bring them back to London?" And they said, "Oh, of course." They really didn't care. They were not that interested in promoting Greek culture or the antiquity. They were more inclined to suppress it. So here, Lord Elgin took these off to London. Whether he had permission or not, they still debate that, but they're clearly gone and they're in the British Museum. However, the Greek government would like them back because what they have now in the museum is a reproductions of what it looked like. And so these sculptures are only 2 or 3 feet tall. So it would be hard to actually see them in full, detail from the bottom, because you're standing, 100 feet or more below if you're looking up at these. But people that knew the story would be there to tell. Back in antiquity, people that knew the story would be able to share what each of the representations and was depicted. Here's Athens. Even though we had this huge financial crisis, the people were out shopping. They were using cash more than credit cards because the whole risk was that the credit cards would disappear. Credit card usage and banks could close, but which fortunately was averted. So we did spend some time walking back to our hotel, and I mentioned that Athens had been a small town, a small village in the 1830s when they decided to make it the capital of the newly independent Greece. So everything in Athens is basically, except for the Parthenon, is largely been rebuilt in the last 100 years, 170 years. And you see this in older parts. We were in an area where we had a very nice hotel, but the hotel, the infrastructure and things like the sanitation, the pipes that had been put in 100 years ago probably might have been adequate 100 years ago, but in today's use of hotels and the growing population, they're inadequate. So in the hotel, there was a little sign that says, "Do not put toilet paper in the toilet. Put it in this little basket," because the infrastructure is inadequate for the pipes in the streets. It's not the hotel's issue; it's the pipes in the streets aren't big enough. So it's as you could imagine, it would be enormously expensive to rebuild the whole sewage system of this part of Athens, and when they spent the money to build the new airport and the subway system, there just isn't money to do some of the things that probably should be done. But they were eager to have the Olympics. And some people would say afterwards, maybe they had the wrong priorities. Maybe they should have spent the money on when they had all this new money from the European Union, they should have spent it on basic infrastructure rather than building all this stuff for the Olympics, all these stadiums that were basically going to be used once. Just an enormous amount of money was spent on the Olympics. And in hindsight, they might have spent it differently. We had the people in Athens were everywhere we turned. They were helpful people. We several times we stopped by our little bakery on the way to and from our hotel, and when you ordered a loaf of bread or whatever you ordered, our staff there would give you an extra cookie or two. You know, they were just helpful and love to spend time in talking to us. One of the downsides, or one of the upsides perhaps, of the financial crisis is people were not shopping as normal. So our workers here had plenty of time to talk to us. So we could have sat and stood and talked to them for 10 minutes with no other customers coming in, because I think in part because of the financial crisis. One of the couple that did not join, that left early from and did not come with us to Athens, because they had been here several other times, they said we had to go to the top of this special hill, this Lukavitas Hotel hill, and there was a tram that took us up there. We couldn't find the tram. We finally flagged down a taxi driver. He could not find the restaurant. He wasn't aware of the restaurant that was up here on this special hill. But we did get to the top of the hill, which had this amazing view of Athens. And there was a hot dog stand nearby that I was able to buy some wine so we could have a toast and watching the sunset over Athens. And as you can see on the left, Athens it's an enormous city, and with mountains in the distance. But the historic Athens is just a small part, and there are very modern parts of Athens where all the infrastructure has been built as a modern infrastructure. Where our hotel was, it was in a part that was part of the earlier development that where they'd really outgrown some of the municipal infrastructures. Here's another picture from that hill. The next morning we went, and this was our final day in Athens. So we really were only in Athens, 48 hours, a little bit less than 48 hours. But we went to the National Archaeological Museum, which we took the subway. We had a 3-day subway pass. We took the subway to the museum area, and we love to look at burial artifacts, because they tell such a wonderful story of what was taking place and what was important to the people in earlier times. And here, these are two of the from the sarcophaguses of tombs, and the one on the right, you see 2 women, actually 3 women, and one is holding a baby. So there's a baby there in the middle. The baby has a little hat. It's not clear who was the deceased. At least it wasn't clear to us who was the deceased, and it might be the one in the middle, but very poignant sculptures. One of the things, 2 things really struck us, on this visit. One is we were at the museum, and this was the little part. The museum had a little area where people could have coffee. This is an enormous financial crisis. People could lose their whole pensions, their savings, be out of work. The average people in Athens, these guys don't look like they're in crisis mode. They seem to take it with stride and saying things will work out. We're not sure how, but things will work out. And then when we were leaving the museum, we were going back to the airport or hotel first to pack up and head to the cruise ship. The cab driver, the manager of the cabs, they have like somebody that would direct you to the right cab. So he wanted 15 euros. And it seemed like a little high to me. And he said, Americans, we're starving. We have to rip you off. And I thought that was so refreshing, that they were very honest, and that really made sense. We didn't complain or try to get a lower price. They are suffering. So we were their guests. They were all treating us well. Maybe we paid 15 euros for what might have been should have been a €9 trip, but in helping these people that are really suffering, we thought let's just do it and not try to find where the metro stop is to get back to our hotel. But it was so refreshing for people to be honest, so blatantly honest. Where this trip in the mainland of Greece was very short. And on another trip, we really should get out to the rest of the mainland Greece, particularly the Peloponnesus. And this is in the map on the left, in that lower quadrant in pink. That is the Peloponnesus. And writers like Rick Steves say that's really where you need to get out to, because there it's the small villages. You really get a sense of the rural Greece, and most of Greece is rural, and that is really the part that you should see. In the first capital before they moved it to Athens, only for 10 years, was in Nafpilo, which is a small, cozy street, a cozy town. Shown here on the picture on the right, and what a beautiful view that is of the Aegean Sea. That would certainly be justify a return trip. So here we are waiting for our subway to take us to the cruise ship, and at least 2 people told us beware of pickpockets. And sure enough, there was a pickpocket on the metro train, and it was very crowded. It was bumper to bumper people. Everybody was just packed in, and a pickpocket tried to get my passport or money, and he figured out where it was, but he was unsuccessful. So after a short attempt, he left the train. But in hindsight, we probably should have just taken a cab to the cruise ship port, but the subway went there, and when we had the free, the 3-day pass, so we might have been penny wise, pound foolish by not taking a cab. And this was the ship that we were on for 7 days, and it was a Princess cruise ship, and it was interesting. There were many passengers from China, Australia, and New Zealand. And probably it seemed like half the ship was people from these 3 countries in Asia and Australia, South Australia, which is interesting, because with particularly the prevalence of people from China. In China, if an elevator door opens, you have to move quickly to get on and off. There are so many people. You can't wait to get on an elevator, and I think that's true for trains as well. And certainly is in Japan. The trains are crowded. You have to push your way in. So it was surprising to see people pushing in and out of elevators when they probably didn't need to, but that was so common as a way to do it in China that the same behavior was occurring on the ship. And sometimes that would frustrate non-Chinese people. The first stop on the cruise ship, and it was a wonderful ship, and they treated us very well. But we were to the island of Santorini, and this is an island. It's actually 5 islands today that was formed by a volcanic crater that collapsed with eruptions of over 20,000 years ago, and then again 200 years ago. So this is a picture of from an airplane of the islands of Santorini. And here we are, that's Mary in the middle, and Barb with our tour guide. So we hired a private tour guide for our visit to Santorini. Now the cruise ship has their own tours, so we could have signed up for a tour ship cruise, and we did that at another stop. But for this one, we hired our own tour guide over the internet, where we saw the reviews. And interestingly enough, we signed up a month or two before the trip, and they didn't ask for money. They said, well, you're signed up, pay us when you arrive. The picture on the right, you can see Mary with this wall, and in the background you can see actually the cruise ship, our cruise ship. So here we're quite high, as you can see from the perspective of the cruise ship. The picture on the right is the chapel or the church on Santorini. There's two large churches, and on the left is a private chapel. And people that are relatively wealthy can choose to build a chapel on their own property. And it's this quaint building. And I asked our tour guide, I said, well, somebody could probably rent this out as a Airbnb or vacation rental by owner. And she said, oh, that would be deeply frowned on. No one would talk to a homeowner that would do that. They would be, no one would talk to them the rest of their lives if they did that. So these chapels are very symbolic of their religious faith, and they might have on the feast day of their saint, their personal patron saint, they might have a priest, Greek Orthodox priest, come and say mass once a year. But the rest of the year, it's basically a family might go there and say a prayer, but it's not used throughout the year. It's only for very special occasions. Many people love to come to Santorini, and you can take a ferry boat from Athens and spend a week here at one of the hotels and do nothing basically but sit on the beach and enjoy wonderful meals. Our tour guide was first of all, a wonderful tour guide. We had a minivan that she took us around in, and one of the reasons we like to have tours by professionals is you really get to know their life story. If they're most tour guides that we've been on, they share the story of their family. You really get behind the just looking at the sites, but learning about what it's like to live here. And she described the kind of the poverty and the economic uncertainty that families were living on, and to the point that people were the people that might have thought, well, we'll have 3 children, they were just saying, well, let's have 1 child, and because they weren't sure they'd be able to afford more in the future. The other thing that she talked about is the extensive training you have to be a tour guide, and you have to be a registered tour guide if you're going to lead tours like she is. So you're basically studying for 2 years to prepare for this very difficult test on history and geography, and half the people don't pass the test the first or second time. So but you really have to devote 2 years of your life to prepare for a test, and because they limit how many tour guides there are. They want to manage that very closely, but strict training, but a major commitment to be a tour guide. So after our wonderful day, and just another footnote on Santorini, our tour guide, as we ended, we still had time before we had to get back to the boat, and she recommended this restaurant, and we went there, and I'm sure the restaurant would have liked us each to have ordered a whole meal, but we weren't that hungry and would be back on the ship, and there'd be another dinner in a couple hours. So we basically just had hors d'oeuvres. But people, while they might have been disappointed, they did not show their disappointment. They were still happy we were there. We ordered some drinks, we had some hors d'oeuvres, and people. It's been our experience that across Europe that people are very welcoming and glad that we're there, and they don't have as blatant as an agenda that sometimes we have, in U.S. restaurants where the staff's on tips, and it's a very different atmosphere. People don't mind if you go to a pub and spend 2 hours there. They're not saying, isn't it time for you to buy more drinks? It's just, they're well paid. It's a whole different atmosphere. It's been our experience. So the next day, we went to the Crete, which is an island in the Sea of Crete, which is all part of the Mediterranean. But this was the home of Europe's first civilizations, the Minoans. And they had a very significant trading empire, 2000 BC in that time period. And the picture on the right is showing some of the frescoes of the artwork that they had created. So they had a very established trading. They would be trading with throughout the Mediterranean, not out in the Atlantic, but throughout the Mediterranean. They were trading very actively, and the civilization ended. And their speculation, well, why did it end? What caused it to end? Did another power come in to be a superpower? Did they lose battles? It's not clear from at least what I could gather. It's not clear why the civilization came to an end, and why Greece and Alexander the Great and other empires and other civilizations grew and grew, and the Mayans faded into the background. This is the city, Heracleion, city of 140,000 people. This was a province of the Venice in the Middle Ages, and so the Venetians, who became the superpower of the Mediterranean, with their shipping and their powerful warships. This was part of the Venetian Empire, and built these very strong defensive walls that still surround the city. Europeans loved to vacation on Crete. So there's lots of Ryan Airlines and EasyJet. Europeans can fly here, spend a week, and it's very easy to get to, and enjoy the warm weather, and visit some of the part of the rural life of the villages if they choose to, or just spend the time on the beach. Tourism represents the vast majority of income to Crete. So the many tourists, and their spending, pays for, the government pays for education. So without tourism, Crete would be in very serious difficulty, as I'm sure they were during the pandemic. We did visit. We took a tour from the cruise ship, and it was to visit this monastery, and it's a very old monastery, but it ran into financial difficulties, and so the male monks departed and went to other monasteries, and they gave it to an order of Greek Orthodox nuns that support and live there now. And there's our tour guide was there on the left, giving us a little bit of history of the monastery. So it was converted to a convent to really keep it open. Otherwise, it would have just closed permanently. So hopefully that will continue to remain in operation. And there's one of the nuns there on the right. We're not sure how many there were. We only saw 2 or 3 at the time we were there. Then we went off to lunch and had a watch pottery, and had a shopping experience before we headed back to the ship. The next day, the ship, and again, these ships, we didn't really travel a huge amount. It was convenient to be on a ship, but later we will be traveling as we go to Istanbul. That is a significant journey that we took. Took a full day and a half. But here in roads. This is only 30 or 40 miles from Turkey, but here, this was a very interesting island. It was a very preserved medieval fortress, and it was the home of the Crusading Knights of St. John. So during the Crusades, there were different religious orders of knights, of soldiers that were fighting and defending with the Crusades, and there were some hospital knights that were trying to take care of the wounded. But the Knights of St. John, they resided here, and this was their headquarters for 200 years until eventually there was no longer a basis to defend it. Constantinople fell to the Muslims in 1492. So they held on another 30 years here before they abandoned this and went off to another part of Europe. So the Citadel is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's very, very impressive. Now we walked through it. The building itself was largely empty. So you saw all these different rooms and where the Grand Master lived. And apparently the knights came from different countries. So there might have been the French knights were looking after one part of the fortress, and the German knights a different part of the fortress. So so knights from throughout Europe came to be part of that defense. It's a very old town, narrow streets. So we wandered through other parts of the town, and it was a warm day, so we stopped at a little restaurant and had a little break, sitting under the trees to keep cool. This is one of my favorite pictures. This father with his young child. They live here. I'm sure they live here. But here we have the motorcyclists driving through town. Cars are expensive, and gasoline's expensive in Europe and in this part of the world. So having a motorcycle and it's a relatively small island. The motorcycle makes sense. The next day we went on to Ephesus. Our destination was Ephesus, and we stopped. The ship actually docks at this town, Crusacia, and I'm sorry, I probably mispronounced that. But we hopped on a bus with a tour sponsored by the cruise ship to get to the town of Ephesus. And this was actually, in ancient time, the second largest city in the Roman Empire. And it was very accessible by Rome. Ships could come from Rome to the Eastern Mediterranean, and there was a river and canal that took the ships directly to Ephesus. Eventually, that access silted up, so ships could no longer come. And so once that happened, Ephesus fell into economic non-existence. It depopulated, and everything we see here would have been basically underground or largely underground, and had to be excavated by archaeologists to uncover what was there, but was not visible to as a town anymore. It was an empty town. But this is the main street of Ephesus, and the building that you see at the far end, which we'll see again in a moment, is the library. Again, one of the very largest buildings at the time. Here's Mary and I as we walk through here, and the whole area is still going through excavation. There is more to this town than what we see today, but it's still buried underground. So over time, they will excavate more and more to uncover the second large city of Ephesus. This is the library, so that would have had tens of thousands of books and documents in scroll format. And so what we see here, this building was the ruins of the building were there, but they had to rebuild it because it over time it would have all collapsed in the process of being underground. So what we see here is taking those parts of the building and re-erecting the building. And it's really only part of the building what they could find. Other parts of the building may have been carted off for people building homes in other parts, or had just been disintegrated over time. But very, very interesting to be able to walk into the building that existed and was central to the town 2,000 years ago. The building on the left, this was a building that was erected to honor the Roman emperor that was coming to visit. And so there are plaques here saying, "Welcome, Roman Emperor," and I'm not sure which one it was, but it was to honor his coming. That building, which may have stood there already, but they put up a plaque probably to honor him. I'm not sure they built it from scratch, but there it is. On the right, you see the communal toilets, and our guide said if it was a cold day, the master would have the slave sit on the toilet to warm it up before the master took advantage of the toilet. So, but they did have toilets. They did have plumbing and water. So it was, and I'm sure they had, as they did in Rome, they had the hot bath, and so that sanitation and aqueducts, all of this was part of the process. Here is the theater, the Roman theater, that can accommodate, built of marble, and can accommodate 24,000 patrons. And St. Paul, the Apostle Paul, spoke here, and he wrote his epistle to the Ephesians. This was the town that after he left, he was sending them letters, and while he was speaking, the Acts of the Apostle talk about a group of artisans that made the golden dolls, to golden images of the different Greek gods and Roman gods. They came and protested because they saw the writing on the wall. If the message of Paul took hold, their livelihood of making the dozens of different images of different gods would be threatened. So that's also talked about in the Acts of the Apostles. We hopped back on our bus and we went to a different part of Ephesus where it was the legendary home of the Virgin Mary. So the legend and the belief by the people in this region is after Jesus died, he told the Apostle Paul, look after the Apostle John, look after my mother. And John, it was legend that he came to this part of the country, part of the world, and that quite likely the Virgin Mary did as well. And this is purportedly the house that she lived in when she lived near Ephesus. So that's part of the legend. And the Pope has been in this region and said, well, this is a holy place. He didn't confirm anything, or it's still kind of a legendary type status, but it's a legend held in the people of this region. And on this wall this is the prayer wall, where people that have a prayer for the Virgin Mary, they can write it on a card and they put it into the holders on this wall. And our tour guide, who we think was Muslim, but she said Muslim people have great respect for the Virgin Mary and for Jesus, and as a prophet, and so honoring Mary is a very natural thing, even for Muslims as well as Catholics that do live in this area as well, Catholics and Christians. There were a huge number of buses that by the time we were leaving, there were triple the number of buses in this area for the Virgin Mary's home. And so our tour guide, she planned to get here early before the great onslaught. We had a 10-minute wait in line to get into where we could walk through the Virgin Mary's house. And later in the day, that could have been an hour or 2-hour wait as more and more buses came. So there was good planning on her part. When we got back to the port town, and there was a shopping opportunity, but particularly for rugs. And so we were asked or invited to sit at a little talk about the heritage of rug making, and the heritage and the value of buying a rug. So we heard that story, and one of the couple that we were with, they wanted to buy a rug, and they did quite a bit of negotiating, but they could not come to an agreement. The next day, we were on the ship the whole day. We didn't dock anywhere, but we were on the long ride through the Dardanelles, going from the Mediterranean into Istanbul, and we passed the area from World War I where the Battle of Gallipoli took place. And the remembrance of Gallipoli was actually 100 years ago, 1 week earlier from when we were on the ship going by this area. And the week before, there were many people. There was an official commemoration of the 100th anniversary. And that's partly why there were so many people from New Zealand and Australia on the ship, because at the Battle of Gallipoli, the British, it was a Winston Churchill strategy that people bought into at the time. They were going to send the Allies over, take over Constantinople, and then attack Germany, the German army from the rear, because there was a stalemate on the west in the trenches. So this was a way to break the stalemate. Unfortunately for the French and the British, they were a month late. The British Navy, they were worried about mines. They did not move aggressively. So the Turkish army, with help of their allies, the German army, they were more and more prepared when the landing actually took place. So eventually, this went on for over a year, and eventually the British French army gave up, and they took the troops all back. Meanwhile, the Allies lost 44,000 soldiers killed and many more wounded, and the Turkish army lost 88,000. So it was a great loss of life. But Australia and New Zealand, they lost 12,000 soldiers, and there were actually many more soldiers from those countries that died on the Western Front. But Gallipoli has a very serious part of the psyche of Australia and New Zealand, because they took their young men. They were never really trained in Australia. They brought them to Egypt, and they gave them some training. So they really have a great deal of bitterness towards Britain and England as a result of Gallipoli. And within a decade, Australia and New Zealand said, we'll be part of the Commonwealth, but we do not want to be we don't want to be a colony anymore. So they remember Gallipoli in a very painful process as an aftermath of World War I. So that whole day we were traveling up the Dardanelles, and the next morning we arrived in Turkey, in Istanbul, and it's Turkey's biggest and most venerable city. 15 million people live here, and it straddles the two continents: Egypt to the east, Europe to the east, and Asia to the west. And this is a picture from our hotel. It was right next to the Hagia Sophia, this enormous building. And just a little bit of history. By World War I, Turkey and the Ottoman Empire was really, they'd been suffering. They were kind of the sick child of Europe for many, many years. They were losing parts of the empire, and with their connection with Germany in World War I, afterwards it continued to fall apart. In 1923, Mustafa Kemal, he was elected the first president, and he was the hero of Gallipoli from the Turkish side. He rallied the soldiers when it looked like the British were going to make a major breakthrough. He rallied the soldiers and was very instrumental in the war, and he led the campaign to topple the Sultan after the war. So he was honored with the title Ataturk, which translates as Father of the Turks in 1934. So he was their first president. But here is just to Turkey is with 16 million people, vibrant city. So shopping, but it's crowded, but the people were helpful. They're warm and outgoing. People spoke English. They would, if you stopped looking at your map, they would say, "Can we help you?" And oftentimes this happened 3 or 4 times. They wouldn't say, "Go in this direction for your destination." They would take you and walk you, for 5 or 10 minutes to your destination. They were that outgoing and that helpful. Now, they often said, "If you're interested in a rug, I have a friend that sells rugs and will give you a special deal." So they were helpful, but they were also trying to help themselves at the same time and maybe make a little commission. If they brought you to a rug shop and you bought, they would get a little bonus in the deal. Here is that same building that I showed you earlier next to our hotel. This is Hagia Sophia. It was built by the Emperor Justinian in 537. So this is basically 1500 years old. And it was built as a Christian church. It then became a mosque, and then it became a museum 50 years ago. And now in 2020, it was converted back to a mosque. And this is part of the political intrigue of Turkey, that the president, as he, bringing back more roots to their Muslim faith in Islam, porting this back to a mosque, was some of his constituents would say this is just a wonderful thing. The interconnection of voting and religion has an impact. Here, when we were there, it was strictly a museum, and one of the things that had occurred, the picture on the left shows that's the Jesus and the Virgin Mary and probably Saint Jerome and Saint John, and these were ceramics and mosaics on the wall that when it was a mosque, this was all covered up and whitewashed, but because it was a museum, they went and they found all the art that had been created 1500 years ago or in between, and to show that on display. So on the right, Mary is looking at some of the artwork, some from the Christian era and some from its era as a mosque. After we visited Hagia Sophia, we went off to look at the Imperial Palace, the residence of the sultans. And this is the Topkapi Palace. And we saw the school children here on the left. Everyone waved and said hi. The palace, it's an enormous complex. This is a bird's eye view of the palace. And the Sultan began building it, and after Constantinople fell to the Islamic armies in 1453. the Islamic armies had controlled all the land around Constantinople, but Constantinople held on for hundreds of years just with its defenses, but eventually it did fall. But this is the palace complex that the Sultan built. And you can see outer walls and inner walls. Here we're not even into the heart of the complex. We're still past the first of 3 gates at this point. Here is some of the seat of power. The picture on the left, this is where the Sultan spent his day with his advisors, with making the decisions. It was the seat of power for 400 years. Later that day, we went to the Grand Bazaar, which was the world's oldest market venue in operation for hundreds of years. 4,000 shops arranged by categories. So this shop line here on the left could be for candy. In another part, the Turkish delight is a sweet candy that can be purchased. There'd be another whole area of shops dedicated to boots, others for gloves. There'd be another area where you could buy equipment for your sailboat or your ship. I mean, so it was by category. There's many mosques, and there's a blue mosque. We did not go to that mosque, but we did go to the Mosque of Suleiman the Magnificent. And this was built in the 1500s. It's an enormous building, and visitors are welcome to come. You take your shoes off, and what we see there on the left, you see these red marks on the ground, on the floor. This is where each of the men, and it would be men only, women are into a different gallery, but if there were 600-700 men there, each would be kneeling in that space dedicated for each person. You take your shoes off, and the women wear a veil. And Mary actually had a veil that she could put on there and go in. Otherwise, they lent you a veil, but women have to cover their heads. And at each of the mosques, at this mosque and others, there is a spot where you could pick up literature on the Islam faith, but nobody was saying, that was just your choice if you wanted to go there and pick something up. And but you were welcome to come, except if they were having a prayer service. So 6 times a day, they're actually having a prayer service for, I think, about 20 minutes or 20 or 30 minutes. But at those times, if you're a non-believer, you're asked to leave. Here is more pictures inside the mosque. Very plain. The idea is to listen and to contemplate and not be distracted by artwork. So the very simplistic design, geometric design up on the walls. From there, we went to the spice market, which had spices. This market dates to the 1600s. So local spices or spices from the Orient, things came from China and they came to Istanbul. And from here, the Venetians might have picked up, before the Europeans discovered a route around Africa, everything came through Istanbul as an option on its way to Europe. We took a lunch break. We travel a lot. We've been there such a short time. We had to move quickly to optimize what we could see. Mary and I did hop on one of the ferries from the European side of Istanbul to the Asian side. So we only spent 20 minutes on the Asian side, which was basically waiting for a boat that would take us back to the European side. But we can say we were officially in Asia for the first time. That night, our hotel, we had a wonderful dinner at our hotel, and the hotel served wine. But there are coffee shops, but there are not taverns or wine bars in the city proper, but a hotel is allowed to serve wine, as they made it available to us. And there we have our dinner. The hotel, actually, they served breakfast as well, but at dinner, you place your order and then they bring it in from the restaurant next door. So, but it was all done very nicely and very quickly. But we just had a wonderful time sitting outdoors. And one of the beauties of Istanbul, and really most Muslim countries, particularly at night when they have the call to prayer, you hear the call to prayer from the mosque, the Grand Hagia Sophia, which was 50 yards from us, but then you hear it echoing across the whole city from other mosques where they're doing the call to prayers, which now are it's a pre-recorded call, but and with microphones, but and amplifiers and speakers, but it's very moving to hear this echoing across the entire city. So this was our final night. As the night came down, and the call to prayer, Hagia Sophia was right next to us. There's a cat up there on the ledge that you can barely see. And the last point, Turkey, and particularly Istanbul, it's a very welcoming and I think safe city to visit. It's a bargain in terms of European capitals. Back in 2015, the lira, the Turkish lira, each lira cost 50 cents. Where now each lira, with the high inflation and devaluation of their currency, each lira is 6 cents. So the buying power of Americans and the dollar in Istanbul, it's just amazing. And the people, while they're struggling financially, it's still a very warm welcome to Americans. They love to visit us. They love to talk and talk to us. And I think the city itself is very, very safe. Particularly Istanbul. There's other parts of Turkey that you probably want to have advice from the State Department on visiting other parts to make sure the remote areas are safe. But Istanbul, from what Rick Steve is telling us, is very safe and continues to be a very welcoming city. So that's the presentation on Athens to Istanbul. I see we have a couple, Julie, I see we have a couple comments or questions in the chat, and other questions. Any questions or comments that I might be able to answer?
Yeah, thank you so much, Gene. That was fantastic. Like you mentioned, we do have some questions. And I also want to let people know that it's not too late to ask a question. Go ahead and put it in the Q&A box there or in the chat. Either is fine. And Gene, if you'd like to unshare your screen,
Okay.
that would be great.
Okay, I will stop sharing. There we go.
Perfect. I had a question really quick. So my roommate visited Greece a while ago, and she said that cats in Greece were kind of like rats in Chicago. Did you encounter a ton of cats in Greece?
We did not, but I know in places like Rome there are, it seems like, millions of wild cats, that feral cats that find a way to live, but they're wandering through all the ancient parts of Rome, and that could likely be true in Athens as well. So they find a way to live, and there's enough food for them, and maybe it does even keep the rat population down. But we did not see that in Athens. But we have seen it in Rome.
Thank you. Let's see. Turkey is at the center of some earthquake activity. Did you see any evidence of earthquake damage?
We did not, but more than likely, when we think of even like Ephesus, those tall buildings of stone, the reason they probably, they probably collapsed in part because of an earthquake in which would account for not only the buildings collapsing, but then all this other dirt climbing on top of the collapsed structures. So that's probably one of the reasons why it had to be excavated, because it all looked like just farmland until somebody happened to dig or put in a well and found, gee, there's a whole city under here.
Absolutely, yeah. And you said you were only in the Asian part of Istanbul for 20 minutes or so.
Right.
But I mean, during the time that you were there, did you see, was it like visually or noticeably different than the European city?
It's different in that the European side where we had started, this was part of the what would you consider the Middle Ages part of Istanbul. So over on the Asian side, that was more modern buildings and more residential areas. But there's a whole lot even on the Asian side that if we were there for a week, you can take wonderful tours. And this is the Bosporus. And when we think, even as we talk about the Ukraine war, all the grain that is sitting there in the Ukraine that they want to get out to Africa and to the world markets, that all comes down from the Black Sea by Istanbul on the Bosporus, heading out to the Dardanelles and the Mediterranean. So, and you'd see, there could be a Russian warship that goes up and down with freedom of passage from the Black Sea out to the Mediterranean. And so it's right in the middle of modern world history. And, even with the Ukraine war now, of saying, how can we get some grain out of the Ukraine? Turkey is trying to say, well, we could help in that. We could send our Navy to protect some of the ships carrying the grain and getting it out to the world market from the Ukraine. So it's all of that is brewing today, very current in the political and world history, the world crisis.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that the Asian portion of Istanbul seemed to have more residences and things like that. Did you get a sense that people tended to live over there, or I'm drawing a suburbs comparison to Chicago?
Probably, yeah. I think the economic, from what I could see, and the economic center of Istanbul is more on the European side, and certainly the government headquarters side. So the Asian side, the impression I have, and it's not a highly knowledgeable impression, but the impression I had, that's more residential and the industry there, where government and world headquarters would be on the more on the Asian side of Istanbul.
Interesting, thank you. Is there anything you can tell us about the change in name from Constantinople to Istanbul?
Well, Constantinople was named after the Emperor Constans, who when Rome split, where what was 2,000 years ago, there was one Roman Empire with one Roman emperor. The Constant moved to Istanbul to create basically two centers and two capitals of the Roman Empire. We had the Eastern Empire with an emperor in Constantinople named Constans starting it, and the other in Rome with descendants of Julius Caesar and others. So when the Muslims took over and it became an Islamic capital, they wanted to name it for they certainly didn't like the name named after the Christian emperor who founded the city. They wanted to create a new name. I'm not sure what Istanbul stands for, but that was I'm sure the impetus to give it a new name.
Absolutely. And we have a comment here. It says, "Thank you very much for your excellent presentation and photographs, Gene. as well as another comment here. Sounds like a great trip. Loved the pictures and the information.
Great.
Tour, enjoying hearing about it. You've got a lot of fans here.
Great. It's delightful. It's a good group. And it's nice. And hopefully when we're back down at the Harold Washington Center, we can still do some virtual stuff at the same time.
Absolutely.
Because I think we have some people from around the country that dial in for the virtual sessions.
I agree. I think that it's made it more accessible to more people for sure. I had one more question here. How did you find your tour guides that you worked with?
Oh, how did we find them? Or were they, so they were excellent tour guides, but so, and we found them by the ones that we've hired on our own. We found them just on the internet, Googling like tour guides in Santorini, and then a whole different groups came up, and you could look at their reviews on like Viator would have reviews of the tour guides, and sometimes you have to take reviews with a grain of salt, but when the tour guide seemed to have many happy people, and when they say you pay us after you complete the tour, you know, that to us that gave us a reassurance that they were confident that they do a good job and that people would be happy to pay them.
For sure. Well, I think that is the extent of actually.
Great.
Nope.
Oh.
Yep. That's it.
Well,
that's the extent of our questions. And that will conclude our travelogue presentation for today. Thank you so much, Gene. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody who attended for supporting the work of the Geographic Society of Chicago.